When the Chicago Bulls went through the trade deadline, not making any moves yet again, it signified or raised questions through the Chicago Bulls fan base on exactly what is this franchise planning to do with some of their players. We're going to talk about today, will the Chicago Bulls end up regretting their inactivity at the trade deadline? How much is DeMar DeRozan really in the Chicago Bulls' future plans? And lastly, we're going to take a look at where the Bulls really do sit with their current draft pick selection and in the lottery, what are their odds and projections, plus preview tonight's game against the Pacers. All that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go and get into this content for today. And so I want to start off talking about this, right? The situation around DeMar DeRozan is one of the more unique situations right now that the Chicago Bulls find themselves in. We'll talk about some other ones as well in this show, but when you look at DeMar DeRozan, he's clearly one of the candidates for the Clutch Player of the Year award. I think he's probably the forerunner for that, the front runner for that award right now. When you look at it, he's been up 23.2 points per game on 58.4 true shooting percentage, and he leads the league in total minutes played. Absolutely, he should be the front runner for the Clutch Player of the Year award. But then the situation the Bulls find them in, which is a result of some things that they did or did not do at the trade deadline. DeMar DeRozan is a player, considering that he's aging, on a team that's fighting for just to be in playing spot, and he's a flight risk at the end of the season. Most teams would have looked to try to move DeMar DeRozan at this year's trade deadline to see what they're going to get. The Bulls have now put themselves in a situation where there's only three options available. There are only three. Either you're going to let him walk for nothing, you're going to re-sign him probably for an overpay, right? At this point, you think if DeMar DeRozan was going to take a team-friendly contract, that contract negotiation probably would have been done, signed, sealed, deliver, boom. We may not even know about it because, again, secret extensions are a thing with this front office. But that is the first two scenarios. And then the third scenario that is much more unlikely is that the Bulls do a sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan, which would have to mean, A, that the team that DeMar DeRozan signs with and DeMar DeRozan would basically have to agree to that happening. And so it puts the Bulls in a situation where they don't have very much of the control. If DeMar chooses to walk away for nothing, he walks away for nothing. That is something he could not even negotiate with the Chicago Bulls once free agency opens up on July 1. Now, that's not going to happen, right? But that is a possibility that the Bulls have placed themselves in. They had a lot of the leverage at the trade deadline. And maybe the Bulls are looking at it and saying, if DeMar DeRozan does walk for absolutely nothing, considering how close we are to the luxury tax, maybe that's worth it. And maybe they're going to be right for that. We'll end up seeing what the results end up being. But the second two options, right, the two options that either lead with the Chicago Bulls getting something back in a sign and trade scenario, you typically don't get a whole hell of a lot back in sign and trades. As a matter of fact, even the Bulls giving up a heavily protected first-round pick for then 31-year-old DeMar DeRozan is something that does not happen commonly in sign and trade scenarios. Usually in sign and trades, you don't get a lot of really good things back. Maybe you get some role players on the back end of the bench, or maybe if the team needs to clear a whole lot of cap space, you can get a player that is productive but maybe on an overpaid contract. So even that doesn't necessarily put the Bulls in the best situation if they were to get a sign and trade. Now, that would be determined by some other things, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then you also look at the other option. The option that I am the least the least excited about is that if you end up keeping DeMar DeRozan on an overpaid contract. Now, is there still a chance that DeMar DeRozan goes to the negotiation tables with the Chicago Bulls and we end up coming out of that on a deal that works friendly for both sides? Yeah, there's a possibility of that. Like, I want to be clear there, but DeMar isn't, he's way more productive, I should say, than what Nikola Vucevic has been, right? And I know a lot of people say, well, we were in this similar situation with Nikola Vucevic and look how it worked out. Well, unfortunately, the situation with Vooch and the Bulls last season, there are no really good centers on the market. They all ended up staying with their teams. Thus, there were no really options out for our teams that were going to pay for Nikola Vucevic what the Bulls are going to pay. And that's not the same situation that DeMar DeRozan finds himself in. DeMar, if he decides to take meetings with other teams, is going to get calls from contenders. Yeah, yes, last time he was out on the free agent market, it was to say people kind of really doubted what DeMar still had left in the tank. A lot of people didn't really take that run he had with the San Antonio Spurs as legit, but he has been so important to the Bulls, especially late in games for a young team that really doesn't know how to close out games. It has made DeMar DeRozan and his impact that much more visible for the league. And so I don't think that the Bulls are going to get this benefit like they did with Nikola Vucevic, where there's just no teams that want to take on DeMar DeRozan or give him a big contract. Now, maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe DeMar goes, he gets humbled out in the free agent market, and we welcome him back with open arms. But it's still those three scenarios that are there for the Chicago Bulls when it comes down to the DeMar DeRozan situation. And that goes again with this front office. And, if it goes one of the wrong ways, right? If you end up overpaying to keep DeMar DeRozan, could that be a little bit easier of a pill to swallow in the sense that DeMar is still a very productive player? He seems like he's always going to be productive. You can sell it on that, right? You can absolutely sell it on that. I can have that conversation. But it still is going to leave you in a place thinking that, okay, well, we have these young players emerging. What are we doing? Right? So the Bulls had an opportunity with DeMar DeRozan in this contract at this trade deadline to kind of add some of that and take back control. And that's kind of the biggest thing in this that I just kind of want to nail home. The Bulls have lost basically all the control and the leverage in this situation. Can they pay him more than what anybody else can pay? Yeah, they can. So there is that benefit, right? But outside of that leverage, which leads to the overpay, you're then overpaying for a 34-year-old player for a team that is fighting and has to fight hard to just stay at 9th seed in the play-in tourney. So it's a lot of questions around the Bulls management of that, and that is kind of just adds to the fact that this Bulls front office has seemingly not understood how to kind of predict the market, and that is one of the things that keep hurting the Chicago Bulls and this front office and trying to kind of change some things with this team. And so, it leads us to our next topic, right? The next topic that I want to talk about is how much will the Chicago Bulls really regret their inactivity at the trade deadline? When you look at it, from the start of the 2021-22 season, the first season where this team came together, the Bulls have a combined record of 120-114. That is a winning record, right? And some Bulls fans have you believe that it's just been all bad since then, but that is still a record that keeps you in mediocrity. And that's where the Bulls are right now. And 120-114, and the season isn't done yet, right? Those numbers could be more closer to even when the time's all done. And that, again, leads to some of the questions on why this team has been operating the way that it has. This team, this front office has maneuvered and operated this team like it's a team that's done something, right? When you look at extending Billy Donovan a whole 2 seasons earlier than what you needed to extend him, and then to see how things have gone, right? You extended him before then. A 120-114 record. Not amazingly great either, right? So when you look at the fact that this team is so committed to, this front office is so committed to what this team this team that they've built that hasn't really accomplished very much. And that's one of the more questionable things that the Chicago Bulls have done in this time when you look at it. Even AK saying this, when we didn't see anything that was going to make us better, we would take a step back, which we don't want. We want to stay competitive. We have an obligation to this organization and this fan base and the city to stay competitive and compete for the playoffs, and that's what we're doing. We had a win percentage of 47% at the time of the trade deadline. Since the trade deadline, we have had a more competitive record of 52.6. That's the win percentage that we've been playing at since the All-Star break, which, again, is one of the better records in the NBA and the league. That's no mistake about it, right? But this team isn't in championship contention. This team isn't being really competitive. What are we contending for, AK? And that leads to this front office not understanding the ebbs and flows of the market. That is one of the things that has hurt this team the most is not understanding the value, how to strike when the value is hottest, right? The doubling down on this core. You had an opportunity at last year's trade deadline to move off Zach LaVine when the New York Knicks were willing to give you first-round picks and R.J. Barrett, a package built around that. You're not going to get anything close to that now. Now, of course, they didn't expect the Zach LaVine and the relationship to go where it was. That team at that point was thinking, hey, we're re-signing our young player that just went on a tear to end the season, right? And that we feel pretty confident in. Like, we feel he's hitting his prime. There's a chance he's going to continue to get better, right? Then you look at the moves that you made. Now, of course, these are all in hindsight. But you traded off Daniel Gafford, who's playing pretty damn good for the Dallas Mavericks, and to play pretty damn good for the Washington Wizards, somebody we could have used on the back end of that bench, right? You end up making a move for Nikola Vucevic that everybody kind of looked at the time as a surprise move because they didn't feel that the Bulls would make a move for the at that time All-Star. And yes, they would have made the playoffs that first year after we traded for Vooch if it wasn't for Zach LaVine getting COVID at the end of that season, right? All those things kind of all factored in, but right now where this team is, and the reason why so many Bulls fans are doubtful of the future of the team isn't because of the talent on the roster. Some people are, right? I want to be clear there, but we have talent on this roster, but we continue to not build around it. We continue to make this makeshift roster of pieces that are solid pieces, right? Like, I think Vooch could still be, even though he's a bad defender, and we know that, he'd still be solid on a team that had a power forward next to him that made sense and covered up some of his limitations, right? DeMar DeRozan has definitely shown that he can still be productive. Zach LaVine, I still think, can be productive, right? We know that. You have the young players that are emerging in Ayo Dosunmu, Kobe White, who have emerged this season, Julian Phillips, who you drafted, that's shown quite a bit of flashes this season. But when you look at this offseason, this could all come to roost for the Chicago Bulls, that they just look at it and they look back at the trade deadline and ask themselves, why didn't you move off DeMar DeRozan's contract? Or you had some control there at the trade deadline. The Zach LaVine, could that trade market get better with teams that strike out in the offseason? There's a possibility of that, right? I don't want to act like there's not, especially when you have a team like the Philadelphia 76ers that have 3 players under contract next season, and that, yeah, they're planning to make a big strike in free agency, and they very well may, but who's to say that they will for sure? Maybe that then pivots them to saying, we got to do something with this cap space, and maybe you can work Zach LaVine in that, right? So there are options. I don't want to act like there are no options for the Chicago Bulls this offseason, because there absolutely are some. But the thing is, again, you got to add clarity to what this roster is going to be. If you're going to go younger, then go younger. That's it. If you're going to do that, that means that you're going to have to take a step back. That part of that quote, we would take a step back, which we don't want, is something that I have talked about if you guys have been watching me for a while. Sometimes you have to take that momentary step back to take a longer-term step forward that is then on better ground and more sustainable. And that the front office's fear to do that, the hesitation to do that, I get it. Would the fans be upset to suffer through a 35-win season? Yeah. But guess what? The pain that we're already dealing with watching this team struggle day in and day out, we're still right now at 34 wins on the season with 10 games left, right? And yeah, the Bulls absolutely, they can go on a 6-4 stretch, a 7-3 stretch to end the season. The Bulls are weird like that. They may do something like that. But this still does not add the hope and the clarity for this roster just isn't there. And so when you have inactive free agencies, when you have inactive trade deadlines, it leads to this frustration by the fan base, right? And you say what the fan base deserves. Don't tell us what we deserve if you're not going to be willing to give everything to get us there. And that includes taking a momentary step back. You said that the Bulls fans last year at the end of the season press conference that we would be surprised by what you did in the offseason. And what you did in the offseason was trade for Julian Phillips, who seems like a player, sign Torrey Craig, who I like, and sign Javon Carter, who has been disappointing. That was the moves that you thought that you wanted the Bulls fans would be really surprised by, AK. The inactivity by this front office at some point has to stop. And whether it's forced upon you, a la the Zach LaVine situation, or it's something that you kind of, it happens for you, right? With if DeMar DeRozan does walk away for nothing, but change needs to happen. And it seems like everybody else around the league sees that the change needs to happen with the Chicago Bulls, but the people running the team. And that is the disappointing part of it. Not saying a full rebuild at all, but make your roster make more sense, right? The Toronto Raptors technically got worse after the trade deadline, but they've added a lot of clarity on what they can do with their roster by breaking up some of the monotony, an older player in Pascal Siakam, a player in OG Anunoby who's definitely helping the New York Knicks. But again, there was some redundancy with certain players on that roster. You got to be willing to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, to use an old saying. And I don't know if this Chicago Bulls team has shown the propensity or the ability or the desire to do that. And that's where you lead into a place where you're very disappointed by your team. Now, with that said, right, the disappointment in this team, a lot of people have talked about, and we're going to get ready to start gearing up after 10 games, regardless, whatever happens after that, it's time to start gearing up for the offseason. And one of the first things that come in the offseason is the NBA draft. So I want to talk a little bit about the Bulls right now and their draft outlook heading into the end of the season, right? 10 games left in the season. The Bulls right now have the 11th worst record in the NBA if the season were to end today. That would mean that the Bulls would have a 9.4% chance to move up the draft lottery and a 2% chance to get the number 1 overall pick, right? And when you look at it, that's about where the Bulls finished last season, which unfortunately that pick went to the Orlando Magic because we didn't move up into the lottery, which is cool, right? Now, so the most likely outcome for the Bulls right now is to finish with the 11th pick. The benefit is that we do own our own first-round pick outright this season, so that's good. When you look at it as well, the Bulls have a chance to either move up or down those lottery odds. There's a slight one. The Atlanta Hawks right now are 1.5 games behind the Chicago Bulls to finish for the 9th seed in the NBA. And if they did pass the Chicago Bulls up, that would then move the Bulls to having the 10th pick in the draft. That would mean a 13.9% chance to move up into the top 4 and a 3% chance to get the number 1 overall pick. When you look at that, that's a nice amount of change there. Is it huge? No. But you go from a 9.4% chance to moving to the top 4 to a 14% chance of moving in the top 4. There's something to be said with that, right? So it's a decent opportunity for that, the odds of that to go further in the Bulls' favor, right? And with the way that the standings are right now, the Bulls aren't going to go beyond the 10th spot. They're just not. The Utah Jazz right now would have the number 9 pick and even more chances to move up. They're 5 games behind the Chicago Bulls per record, so the Bulls really don't have a chance to really kind of move up more than that. So the most likely scenario is that the Chicago Bulls are either going to finish with the 10th overall pick or the 11th overall pick before heading into the lottery, right? Now, going into the lottery, could the Bulls get lucky and move in the top 4? Yeah, there's a chance of that. But then there's the other flip side of this is that the Bulls make it out the play-in tournament, which at that point, they would be moved out of the lottery entirely. And that is when you're just locked into your pick. Now, at that point, what that does, that makes my job easier as far as in this summer, I could start my draft process and critique and looking at prospects earlier because the Bulls will be outside the lottery with a chance to move up. But I think when you look at this again, this is another thing showing that the way that DeMar DeRozan helped keep this team afloat is superficially uplifting the team to a record that they really would not have if it wasn't for them. And you can say that about a lot of players with a lot of teams, but DeMar DeRozan is the right now. And I wouldn't even say, even if we do re-sign him, you can say that DeMar DeRozan is really the future of the Chicago Bulls in any meaningful way. But imagine if the Bulls had moved DeMar DeRozan. Would we be fighting for a playing spot? Probably not. But we have better odds at the draft lottery for the people that like to look at that and say, and I'm not here to say that that's the right move to make either. I'm just presenting the different options and scenarios that the Chicago Bulls find themselves in heading towards the end of the season. And it really depends on how they finish these last 10 games that are going to determine which way we're looking and what things that we have available to us in this offseason for the Chicago Bulls. So we'll end up seeing, man. We'll end up seeing. Now, the Bulls do have a game today against the Indiana Pacers as well. And this is a game where the Bulls and the Pacers always seem to play each other tight, right? That's just something that always happens. These are two teams that always have competitive games against each other. They're interdivision opponents as well. The Pacers right now are riding a 6-4 winning streak over the last 10. They have a 1-game winning streak as well over, right now from their last game. The Bulls are on a 3-game losing streak, and we're hoping that the Bulls can end their 3-game losing streak today. Now, the Pacers, which have a great offense, right? We know that the Pacers offense, when it's rocking and rolling, they have the number 1 offense in the league, averaging 123 points per game. That's just the reality of it. They're also one of the better three-point shooting teams in the NBA as well. So, this is a team that can get hot, right? It's not amazing. They're not the Minnesota Timberwolves or the OKC Thunder when it comes to shooting three-pointers, but they're another team that can get hot, and we've seen them get hot against the Chicago Bulls before. They're right in the middle of the pack as far as three-point attempts made per game, which is something that definitely hurts the Chicago Bulls. We've seen it, we know it, we understand it. It happens, right? So you want to look at that, and can you keep them off the boards as well? But then it's a completely different story defensively. The Indiana Pacers are one of the worst rebounding teams in the NBA. They're actually the 3rd worst rebounding team in the NBA, and we know that the Bulls, when they win games and play well, especially when they get out in transition, rebounding is a big part of that. The Pacers are also the 2nd worst team as far as points allowed per game, but they're the worst team in the league as far as defensive rating and efficiency. So this is a team that is susceptible to the Bulls if they come in and they play offense really well. And that's what the Bulls need to look to do, is to be crisp on offense tonight against the Indiana Pacers. If you can do that, you can win this game. You got to lock in, Chicago Bulls. That's what it comes down to. How you do and how you perform in this game tonight against the Indiana Pacers. This is the start to your final 10 games. Take this one by the reins, set your tone defensively as much as you can against this high-powered offense, and cook them on the offensive side of the ball. If the Bulls can avoid going on a 4-game losing streak, that'll be the best. The Atlanta Hawks are right there on the Bulls' heels, and they are ready to move into that 9th seed despite the injuries and things that team is dealing with. They play the Portland Trailblazers today. That's a team that only has 19 wins. That we could very well be coming out of today at the end of the night talking about only being a half game above the Atlanta Hawks with 9 games left to play. Let's see how the Chicago Bulls show up tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know your guys' thoughts on all the topics down below. Do you think the Bulls will end up regretting their inactivity at this trade deadline? Do you think DeMar DeRozan stays? Does he go? Do you like the Bulls' chances of moving up in the lottery? And do you think that could be the focus of the team? And then lastly, how do you think the Bulls are going to fare tonight against the Indiana Pacers? Let me know all that down below. Make sure you guys are following the channel at Bulls Central Pod. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button as well. In return, giving you the best daily content for the Chicago Bulls on all of YouTube, the only truly daily Chicago Bulls YouTube channel and podcast in the world. That's just it. That's what we are. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for our mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.